Monitoring results. This is the first step in the monitoring phase, and we begin by having first a clear idea what is the definition of monitoring. So monitoring is the continuous process of assessing the status of the project implementation in relation to the approved project plans and the budget. So that is the definition we're going to use in this presentation. The idea is that we need to make a continuous process. It doesn't happen just once or twice during the life cycle of the project, but it's a continuous process. So what is project monitoring? Why we need it? Well, the first one is that we need to learn from the experience to improve any future activities. We also need to show accountability of the resources used and the results obtained. We also take informed decisions on the future of the project. And then monitoring helps us promote empowerment of project beneficiaries. That means if they are involved in the monitoring process. So monitoring results helps identify the areas where the project is meeting its goal. And we need to be able to answer these questions. What have we achieved so far? How far have we gone? What changed from the approved plans? We had some ideas and we had some instructions about how to implement, but something changed, and we need to know what has changed. We also need to identify where we can improve and what we have learned. And that will provide the inputs to the adapt phase as we start looking ways to improve our project so we can be more effective and more efficient. One of the first tools that we use to monitor is the project log frame that we developed during the planning phase, and we use as a guideline to implement our project. We had the levels of the goal, the outcome, output, and activity. Most of the monitoring will occur at these two levels. Activity will be the most amount of work that happens in the project and will require the most amount of monitoring effort. Then we have our outputs. Outputs will also provide us with information. They are the direct results of the activities, and we also need to monitor if the activities are producing the expected results. Then we might have, depending on where you are in your project, some information about the outcomes, the changes that are happening in the communities or in the group of beneficiaries. Again, depending on where you are in the early phases of your project, in the moments when you are just implementing and getting some basic results, you may not have enough information on the outcomes. You may have more information when you're close to end. The goal, usually you don't see that much information, and it's very difficult for some projects to see if they have been able to make any impact at the goal, mostly because it takes a long period of time for the goal to be achieved, and mostly it's about the contributions to the goal. You will see some of those results later at the end of the project, maybe during the evaluation of the project, to see how those outputs and outcomes of the project were able to contribute to the final goal. But what is important is that we understand that here is where we're going to be working mostly during the monitoring phase. Let's look now at how we use our monitoring indicators. In the log frame, we were able to identify indicators at each one of those levels. One of the tools that we use is that we try to chart or create graphics for our goals. So we have a chart where we identify our goal for each one of those periods in the project, and it tells us what we plan. This is what we were planning that the initial results will be for our project. And when we have the data, we then compare with what is the actual progress. And we can see that during the first phases or 2 cycles of the project, we were not able to meet what we planned. But then the project was able to catch up and then meet above what was planned. And that is the important element of what we look when we're trying to chart these indicators. They help us understand what is happening compared to the plans in a graphical and visual way that can help us make decisions. Here's another view of how we can then use those indicators and create some charts. Again, in the blue, we have our goals. We also have in red our baseline, the initial data from which we are starting the work, and in green, the current progress. and we can look at the different sectors or groups that are being measured based on the activities of the project. And we can see this is a project that's already maybe 50% complete. And the chart, even though may show, yes, we have some progress in some areas. Here it is, we're having good progress, but it also helps us identify the areas where we have question marks. Something is happening in those two areas. And those will be the areas that the project manager and the team will need to focus. And maybe we need to make some changes in the strategies. Maybe we need to some changes maybe on the way we're collecting data. Maybe we need to change the approach. Whatever is the solution, the idea is that by charting the information in a graphical method helps us identify quickly where we have a problem and concentrate our focus and solve those areas for the next reporting period. Here's the reason why it is important to do that. How the outputs, when they are all complete, help contribute to the outcome. If the outcome then is complete, we will know it will have a good contribution to the goal. But when we're having outputs that are having problems and they are not complete, they will also have an impact to the outcome. And an outcome that is not 100% complete may not be able to provide the contributions to achieve the goal. So we look at those areas, we try to find out where we're having problems, what are the outputs or activities or the results in the project that are having challenges, and we concentrate and we try to fix those problems. Another area that is important after monitoring our indicators, we need to monitor our assumptions. Have the initial assumptions changed? And we know in projects, in development projects, they usually do. And our initial assumptions could have been in terms of the participation of the key stakeholders, the contribution from partners, the capacity of the organization, access to resources or to geographic areas, the use of resources, any dependencies, whether they're internal or external. And we also assumptions about the context. And for that, we used this analysis that is called the PESTEL analysis, that we look at the political, the economic, social, technological, environment, and even legal context of where the project is operating. All of them will have an impact at the activity level, at the output level, and even at the outcome level. All those assumptions we need to monitor and make sure that they're still valid. And if they have changed, they may have some consequences to the project and the way it was designed. Then another important area that we need to monitor is risk. We use this risk matrix in the planning phase, and we identify risk levels. We mark those high risk levels in red and then the low risk levels in green to help us prioritize our effort in those risks that will have the most impact to the project. We identify a response, an action date, and an owner. During the monitoring phase, what we need now is to monitor the status. The project manager will meet with the team or with the different owners of those risks and get a status of where we are. Some activities could have started, some have been closed, meaning that we completed that activity. Now the risk will not have that impact to the project. Some might still be open, meaning that we haven't done any work because it's a low priority or some new problem happened. This is the role of the matrix, is that allow us to see where we are. We get that information, we collect the data from the different people in charge of managing the risk, and we are able to analyze where we are and see if we need to give more time or more resources so we can address those, especially those critical issues that we have in the project. Another element of monitoring is that we also need to look at that risk. They change. There are changes in the levels of impact. There might be changes in the probability. There might be new risks or risks that become issues, and even residual risks. Residual risk it's an important concept. It means that sometimes you will have some actions to either avoid the risk or reduce the impact, and you implement those actions. But there may be, because of the lack of understanding we had about the risk, there may be still some residual elements of that risk that might become a problem to the project. So don't always assume that because you implemented some actions to avoid the risk or reduce the impact, the risk is completely gone. Make sure that you have a better understanding and try to analyze the situation so there are no residual risks as part of that actions you took in the project. The concept between changes is that we might have a risk that initially was here, having a medium probability and a low impact, but as we start moving in the project and we get more information, we see that the risk now is at this new level. So the strategies that we had at the beginning will not work anymore. And if you try to use those, they might have even a negative effect. You can also have a risk that was initially having a low impact but high probability, but now it has moved. Now is high probability and high impact. Again, whatever strategies you had before will not work, and you will need to change your strategies to address the risk now that is on a high probability and high impact. And this is an exercise that needs to happen constantly on very periods of reviewing the project. You look at the risk and see if the information you have is better, that you can then change your strategies depending on where the risk is now located. The final element that we look in terms of monitoring the results, we also look at monitoring the stakeholders. During the implementation phase, we started to do some of the work to increase the level of either awareness on the project, create more interest, and change some of the perceptions the stakeholders have on the project. Either was a communication plan or building the relationships and trying to create more interest from key stakeholders to the project. During this phase, what we do is that we try to see where they are. We can see then and mark from each one of those stakeholders that we identify in the project where they are now based on the progress. So we now have what we call a new position. So we know that this is the new position of the stakeholders. And in some cases, we see that, yes, we have made good progress. We achieved what we wanted with them. In some cases, we might see that nothing has happened, that we still need to do some work. Or there's still some effort needed to continue the building of the relationships so they can increase their interest to support the project. And that helps us also have more focus on how you're going to be using your time in building those relationships with those key stakeholders. Again, the idea is similar to what we saw in the risk matrix. The stakeholders, we had these matrix to identify based on their level of influence and their level of interest. And as we make progress in the project, some of those levels will change. And we're going to see that some stakeholders that had low interest now, they have high interest, which is good. That means that our actions, our activities designed to do that are having results. But we might also find the contrary. We might find some stakeholders, they lost interest in the project. So that is a problem. We might also find that because of certain circumstances, certain stakeholders, they are losing their level of influence. It could be by two reasons, because one of those could be that we are now in a different phase of the project or in a different component of the project, so their influence on the project doesn't have that much weight anymore. We can also find that we have certain stakeholders that have increased their level of influence. So now we need to be more cautious about how we're going to be managing these stakeholders. And we can also see certain stakeholders that are now new, meaning that we didn't identify them, but now we can then identify them in this matrix, and we need to take the action, especially when we have stakeholders with high influence and low interest in what we can do to move them and increase the level of interest in the project, because probably we need their support. That happens again during the life of the project. at regular intervals. So you can meet again with the team and monitor where are your stakeholders. And they're going to be changing. That is the nature of development projects. Depending on the circumstances, changes in the environment and the dynamic context, the stakeholders are going to be changing, and you need to start readapting your strategies. You need to change your plans so that now you have the right strategies to deal with those changes that you see on the stakeholders. So monitoring it again is a continuous process. It doesn't happen one or twice during the life of the project. Sometimes you are driven by the needs or the changes in the context that forces you to monitor those changes and take corrective actions immediately.